There is a rule in the Venom Research Lab that every snake milker learns before they are ever allowed to touch a snake. A rule that is given to you not in writing, not in any official training document, not in any safety manual produced by any university or pharmaceutical company or government research body, but in person, quietly, by the person who trained the person who trained you, passed down through the specific chain of people who have done this job in the darkened rooms full of venomous animals and who have accumulated between them the kind of knowledge that can only be accumulated by surviving long enough to pass it on. The rule is this: when you are in the milking room at night with a live snake in your hands and the other snakes are active in their enclosures, you do not count them. You do not count the enclosures. You do not count the animals you can see. You do not verify the number against any list or log or manifest. You do your work. You return the animal you are working with to its enclosure. You close and lock the enclosure, and you leave the room. You do not count. I was told this rule on my second week by my supervisor, a woman named Dr. Chun who had been working in this lab for 14 years, and who gave me the rule in the specific tone of someone who has decided that the most important information she has to pass on is too important for hesitation or qualification. "Do not count them," she said. I asked her why. She looked at me with the expression I have since come to recognize as the expression that people who know specific things about specific dangers use when they are deciding how much of what they know to give away. And she said, "Because the count will be wrong, and you will spend the rest of your time in that room trying to find out where the error is, and you will not be doing your job, and you will not be paying attention to what is in your hands. And what is in your hands will know it." That was what she said. What is in your hands will know it. I have been milking venomous snakes in this lab for 3 years, and I know what she means now in a way that I could not know then, and I am going to tell you what I know. Let me tell you about this job first, about what it actually is to be the person in the room at 2 in the morning with the king cobra. Because the distance between what most people imagine this job to be and what it actually is in practice is a distance that matters for everything I am about to tell you. Venom research is a legitimate and important field of pharmaceutical and medical science. The venoms of snakes and other animals are among the most chemically complex substances found in nature, each one a tailored cocktail of proteins and enzymes and peptides refined by millions of years of evolution to do a specific catastrophic thing to the physiology of whatever the animal needs to subdue. And the same properties that make them catastrophic make them pharmacologically extraordinary, make them the source of compounds that are being developed into treatments for everything from hypertension to chronic pain to cancer. The work of extracting venom for research is called milking, and it is exactly what it sounds like, and it requires a person to physically handle the animal, to hold the snake in a specific grip behind the head that controls the jaw and prevents it from directing a strike, and to guide its fangs into a membrane stretched over a collection vessel and allow it to express venom, which it does involuntarily in response to the pressure of the controlled bite. And the venom is collected and processed and sent to the researchers who need it. This is the job. It is a manual job, a physical job, a job that requires the sustained fine motor control of a watchmaker and the specific form of courage that is not the absence of fear, but is the management of fear into something useful, something that keeps your hands steady and your grip correct and your attention on the animal in your hands and not on anything else in the room. The lab I work in is attached to a university research hospital in the Northeast. It is in the basement level of one of the older campus buildings, which is where labs like this tend to be, because the basement provides climate stability, because the access limitations of basement spaces provide a level of inadvertent security, and because the specific requirements of a venomous animal housing facility make it preferable to have it at or removed from the parts of the building where other people work and study and move through in the ordinary course of their days. The lab has 3 sections. The outer section is the administrative area, the desks and the filing and the safety documentation, fully lit, The most ordinary-looking space you can imagine, the specific bland institutional aesthetic of every university research office in the world. The middle section is the preparation and processing room, where the collected venom is processed and stored, where the equipment is maintained, where the protocols are executed, also well-lit and functional and ordinary in the way of a well-run laboratory. And the inner section is the milking room and the housing room, separated from each other by a glass observation wall, and these rooms are different. These rooms are the rooms that the job actually happens in, and they are different from the outer sections in ways that are both practical and atmospheric, and that I am going to describe to you before I take you into them at 2 in the morning. The housing room is where the animals live. It is a room of approximately 30 feet by 20 feet with climate control set to the specific temperature and humidity requirements of tropical venomous species, which means it is warm and humid in a way that the rest of the building is not. Warm in the way of an environment designed for the comfort of animals that evolved in the tropics. And this warmth has a quality at night, when the building above is quiet and the ventilation system is the loudest thing in the outer rooms. That is, different from its quality in the day, is more immediate, more present, the specific warmth of many living bodies in an enclosed space. The housing room contains, depending on the current research protocols, between 40 and 60 individual enclosures, stacked floor to ceiling on stainless steel shelving. Each enclosure a locked ventilated unit containing between 1 and 3 individual animals. The animals are diverse. Our collection at any given time includes multiple cobra species, mambas, vipers of several varieties, a rotating population of other elapids and crotalids depending on what research is currently active. On any given night shift, the housing room contains a conservative estimate of 60 to 80 individual venomous animals, each in its enclosure, each alive, each in possession of enough venom to kill an adult human in a time frame that our safety protocols exist to ensure never becomes relevant. This is the room I walk through every night to reach the milking room. This is the room whose ambient I know the way I know my own breathing. The specific sound of 60 to 80 living venomous animals in their enclosures at 2 in the morning, the rustle and the scale sound, and the occasional heavy movement of a large animal repositioning against the glass, the thermal clicking of the temperature regulation system, the specific humidity in the air that coats the inside of your nose with warmth when you breathe it. I know this room. I know it the way you know a place you have been every night for 3 years. The milking room is on the other side of the glass observation wall, accessed through an interlocking airlock system that allows only one door to be open at a time, ensuring that no animal that might escape the housing room could pass into the milking room and vice versa. The milking room is smaller, perhaps 15 by 15, and it contains the milking station, a padded surface at working height with the collection vessel set up and the various tools of the procedure, good overhead lighting that is focused on the milking station specifically, and 2 emergency response kits mounted to the wall that contain the anti-venoms for the most common species in our current collection. The milking room is where I do my work. The milking room is where, at 2 in the morning, I take a king cobra from its enclosure in the housing room and carry it through the airlock and place it on the milking station and perform the extraction procedure that is the reason I am here, and that is, for the duration of the procedure, the only thing I am supposed to be thinking about. The king cobra is the largest venomous snake in the world. Ours is a male, 4 years old, 8.5 feet long, and approximately 9 pounds, which does not sound like much until you are holding it. Until you have the head in your right hand and the specific grip that controls the jaw, and the body is moving through your left hand in the specific way that 8.5 feet of muscle moves when it is not fully cooperative, which it never fully is, and you understand the weight of it in a different way than you understood it when it was a number in a file. The king cobra is also, among venomous snakes, one of the most intelligent. This is not anthropomorphization. This is the observation of everyone who has worked extensively with this species, supported by research into their cognitive behavior. They are aware of their environment in a way that many other venomous species are not. They track movement with a specificity that reads as attention. They appear to habituate to individual handlers in a way that suggests recognition, not of faces perhaps, but of something. Of some quality that distinguishes one person's handling from another's. Our king cobra, who I have been working with for 2 years, handles differently with me than he handles with other lab personnel. Not more easily, not more cooperatively, differently, with a specific quality that I have stopped trying to name and have started simply accepting as the specific quality of our particular relationship, whatever that relationship is. The informal rules of this job are layered and specific, and each one exists for a reason that I understand better now than I did when I learned it. The first rule is the counting rule I already told you. The second rule is about the housing room lights. The housing room maintains a low red spectrum night light during the hours between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m., which is the standard protocol for nocturnal animal facilities, preserving the circadian rhythm of the animals and maintaining their activity patterns on a schedule that supports the research. The red light means that when you enter the housing room at 2 in the morning, the room is not dark and is not fully lit, but is in the specific red-lit semi-dark of a photography darkroom. Everything visible, but nothing in its natural color. The enclosures and the animals and your own hands all in the same red-tinted monochrome. You do not adjust your eyes to this light the same way you adjust to normal light. You navigate it differently, learn it differently, and in this light the housing room has a quality that it does not have in the daytime. A quality that 3 years have not made ordinary to me. A quality that I accept as the specific atmosphere of the environment and that I manage the same way I manage the counting rule and the other rules, which is by not engaging with it directly. By keeping my attention on the task and my hands on the work. The third rule is about sounds. The housing room at night produces a specific ambient, the sound of many animals in enclosures in a temperature-controlled environment, and this ambient is variable in a way that matters. There is a baseline level of sound that corresponds to the normal activity of the collection at rest, and there is an elevated level that corresponds to agitation, to animals responding to something in the environment that has altered their status from rest to alert. You learn the difference quickly. The difference is not subtle. When the collection goes from baseline to elevated, you stop whatever you are doing. You assess your position relative to any open enclosures, and you do not continue your work until you have identified the source of the agitation and confirmed it is not a breach or an escape. This is formal protocol as well as informal rule, and I follow it every time without exception. But there is a third level of sound that the formal protocol does not address, a level that sits between baseline and elevated, a level that the experienced milkers know and the formal documentation does not acknowledge, which is the sound of the collection going quiet. Not quiet in the sense of baseline rest, which has its own ambient of movement and scale sound and thermal clicking. Quiet in the sense of the specific held quality of many animals simultaneously suspending their normal movement and noise, simultaneously orienting towards something, simultaneously paying attention to the same thing. When the collection goes quiet like this, when 60 to 80 venomous animals in their enclosures all stop their ordinary movement at the same moment, you stop what you are doing and you do not move until they start again. You wait. You breathe. You do not move. And when they resume, you assess the situation and you decide whether to continue or to secure and leave. This is the rule that no formal training ever gave me. This is the rule I learned because Dr. Chun learned it, because someone before her learned it, because the collective quiet of a room full of venomous animals at 2 in the morning is a communication. Is the entire collection saying in the only language available to them that something in the room has changed, that something has entered their awareness, and you are in the room with them, and whatever has changed for you too. I need to tell you about the Tuesday in October. I need to tell you about the specific Tuesday because the Tuesday is the reason for all the context I have been building, is the reason I needed you to understand the rules and the environment and the red light and the king cobra and the quiet. Because the Tuesday is the night all of those things came together in a sequence that I have been trying to find the correct framework for since it happened, and that I am telling you now because I believe the framework does not exist, and the correct response to the absence of the framework is to tell the story and let whoever hears it decide what the framework should be. It is a Tuesday in October, 2:47 in the morning by the clock on the processing room wall, and I have completed 2 milking sessions already that night, a Gabon viper and a Mozambique spitting cobra, both routine, both in the log, both returned to their enclosures and secured. My 3rd session is the king cobra, which I always do last when I can, because the king cobra is the animal that requires the most from me, and I prefer to have the easier sessions behind me before I go into the housing room for him. I run through my checklist. My grip gloves are on. My safety equipment is verified. My anti-venoms are confirmed in the milking room emergency kit. I go through the airlock into the housing room in the red light. The collection is at baseline. I can tell this in the first moment. The specific quality of the ambient I have described, the normal alive sound of the room. I move to the king cobra's enclosure, which is on the 2nd shelf from the top of the unit on the north wall, and I begin the process of extracting him for the session. This is a 2-step process, using a hook to encourage him out of the secured hide box and into a position where I can establish my grip. And he comes out of the box with the specific quality of a large, intelligent animal that has done this before and that has a set of responses to this situation that are not quite routine, but are established. And I establish my grip, and I secure him, and I turn to carry him to the airlock. The collection went quiet. Not to baseline. Not to the normal rest ambient. To the specific collective quiet I described. The simultaneously suspended quality of many animals all stopping together, and I stopped moving because that is the rule, and I stood in the red-lit housing room with the king cobra in my hands, and I listened to the quiet, and I looked at the room. The enclosures were all closed. All the units on, I did not move. The king cobra was in my hands, and my hands did not move, and my feet did not move, and I looked at the corner, and the collection was completely silent around me, and the thing in the corner was completely still, and I do not know how long this lasted because time in that kind of moment does not behave the way time normally behaves. And then the collection began to resume. Not all at once. In the way that a natural resumption happens. One animal, and then another, and then the general return of the ambient. The normal alive sound of the room coming back the way the sound of a forest comes back after a disturbance has passed. And as the ambient returned, I looked at the corner, and the shadow in the corner had the shape it normally has, the right angle of the floor and wall, and the base of the shelving unit. And whatever had been in the corner in addition to those things was not in the corner anymore, and I was in the room with the king cobra in my hands, and the collection resuming around me, and the red light, and the 2:47 on the clock. I completed the session. I took the king cobra into the milking room through the airlock, and I did the extraction, and I returned him to his enclosure, and I locked his enclosure, and I did not count. I did not count because the rule says not to count, and I did not need the rule to tell me not to count on that particular night, because counting was the thing I least wanted to do in that room. The thing I was most specifically not going to do, because the count and what the count might show was the exact category of knowledge that I understood on that Tuesday at 2:47 in the morning with complete and unambiguous clarity. Is not knowledge that helps you in that room. The count is not knowledge that helps you. What helps you is your hands and your grip and your attention on what is in your hands and not on the corner of the room and not on the shadow that the corner contains, and not on the number of enclosures, and not on whether the number of enclosures matches the number it should match. What helps you is the rule. The rule helps you. The rule that Dr. Chun gave me in the tone of someone giving information too important for qualification. The rule that came from the person before her and the person before that. The rule distilled from the accumulated experience of everyone who has been in this room in the dark at 2 in the morning and who is still available to pass the rule on. Do not count them. Do your work. Return the animal to its enclosure. Close and lock the enclosure. Leave the room. I follow this rule every time without exception, and I will follow it every time for as long as I do this job, and I will give it to whoever comes after me in the same tone and without qualification, and when they ask me why, I will tell them what Dr. Chin told me, which is the truest and most complete answer to the question, and which gets more true with every Tuesday in October that I survive. What is in your hands will know it. Keep your attention on what is in your hands. That is the rule. That is the only rule that finally matters. Keep your attention on what is in your hands, and do not look at the corner. Story number 2. Nobody tells you about the smell before you take this job. That is the first thing I want you to understand. The first piece of information I want to establish before I tell you anything else. Because the smell is not incidental, it is not background. It is the central atmospheric fact of the hair boiling facility at 3 in the morning, and everything that happens in the facility happens inside the smell and cannot be understood without it. You can describe the smell of boiling animal hair in technical terms. The sulfurous compounds released by keratin degradation at sustained high temperature, the ammonia from the protein breakdown, the specific fatty acid signature of the skin residue that comes with the hair, the overlay of whatever chemical processing agents are being used in the current batch, sodium sulfide typically, sometimes thioglycolate, depending on the product specification. You can describe it in technical terms, and the technical terms are accurate, but they do not communicate the experience of the smell. The way it is not a background smell, but an immediate and total smell. The way it fills every part of the air you breathe from the moment you enter the facility to the moment you leave it, and for a period after you leave it that varies depending on how long you were inside. A smell that is alive in a way that chemical descriptions do not capture. Alive in the specific way of something organic being transformed at high temperature. Alive in the way that the 4 60-gallon vats of boiling animal hair that I stir every night from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. are alive, which is to say no longer alive in the way they once were, but in possession of a quality that living things leave behind in the materials that compose them. A quality that the heat and the chemicals bring out in a way that makes it present and immediate and impossible to ignore. The hair boiling facility at 3 in the morning smells like something between animal and chemical, between the living thing that the hair came from and the industrial process that is transforming it. And in this smell, in this specific atmosphere, I do the job I am going to tell you about. And the job has rules. And the rules exist for a reason. And the reason is the thing I am building toward, the thing I am going to show you at the end of the shift when the third vat does what the third vat does at 3 in the morning when I am the only person in the facility. Let me tell you what hair boiling is and why it exists, because this is not a job that most people know about, and the not knowing is a gap that matters for the story. Animal hair, the hair from hides processed in tanneries, from the floor sweepings of livestock operations, from the byproduct streams of various agricultural and food processing industries, is a raw material with industrial applications that have existed for centuries. Boiled and processed animal hair is used in upholstery padding, in certain construction materials, in the production of specific types of industrial felt, in the bristle material for certain categories of brushes, in several applications in the musical instrument industry. The boiling process does multiple things. It softens the hair shaft, removes the surface scales that make raw hair coarse and difficult to process, and begins the chemical transformation that allows the hair to be further processed into whatever final form the application requires. The facility I work in handles primarily bovine and porcine hair, with occasional batches of equine material, depending on the current order schedule, and the production runs at night because the process is energy intensive and the facility's utility contracts price nighttime energy more favorably than daytime. And because the chemical processing generates fumes that the ventilation system manages better in the cooler temperatures that nighttime ambient provides. This is why there is a night shift. This is why I am here at 3 in the morning in an industrial facility in the district that smells like rendered animal in a chemical bath. I am here because the economics and the chemistry make nighttime production preferable. This is the ordinary explanation. This is the reason that exists in the contracts and the shift scheduling software and the facility manager's operational planning. The other reason, the one that the veteran workers know and that is not in any document, I am getting to. The facility is a standalone industrial building of the type that the district is full of: pre-war construction, heavy brick walls and iron frame construction, and concrete floors that hold the cold in winter and the heat in summer. High ceilings with industrial ventilation systems that move enormous volumes of air and that create a constant directional draft through the facility that you learn to orient to the way you orient to wind outdoors, as a directional reference and a temperature signal. The 4 processing vats are in the main production floor, a large central space that is open from the floor to the ceiling, and that in the daytime, when the overhead fluorescent banks are fully operational, is lit with the flat institutional brightness of industrial workspaces. At night, with the day shift gone and the fluorescence on the energy management timer, the main production floor is lit by the facility's nighttime working lighting, which is a reduced system of overhead fixtures at 50% of daytime output spaced further apart, and supplemented by the specific red-orange glow of the heating elements beneath the vats and the steam that rises from the vat surfaces and catches this glow and fills the space above the vats with a reddish vapor that moves in. The draft from the ventilation system in slow rolling patterns that you stop seeing after the first few weeks, but that are there every night. The visual expression of the chemistry happening in the vats below. The vats themselves are 60-gallon stainless steel vessels, heated from below by electric elements, temperature controlled by a thermostat system that maintains the processing temperature within a specific range, and each one is loaded at the beginning of the night shift with the batch prepared by the day shift, loaded and sealed and brought to temperature before my shift starts, so that when I arrive at 11 the vats are already at process temperature, and the batch is already in the active phase of the boil. My job is to monitor the temperature and chemical levels at prescribed intervals, to stir the vats on the stirring schedule, to sample and test the batch quality at the testing intervals, and to add chemical agents as needed to maintain the processing parameters. This is the technical description of my job. The job also has informal dimensions that the technical description does not address. Dimensions I am going to tell you about now. The stirring schedule is the heart of the job. 4 vats, each stirred on a rotating schedule. The stir itself done with a long-handled industrial paddle through the sealed stirring port at the top of each vat. The paddle inserting through the port and reaching the interior without breaking the sealed processing environment. The schedule is timed because the chemistry of the process requires specific intervals of mechanical agitation and rest, and the schedule is documented and followed. But the schedule has an informal modification that the veteran workers apply, and that is not in the documentation, which is this: Vat 3 is stirred last. Not second to last, not third of 4 in any order, but always last. Always the final stir of each cycle. I was told this on my first week by a worker named Mikhail who had been doing this job for 8 years and who had the specific quality of someone who has accepted a very large number of unusual things as simply the way things are. He said, "Vat 3 goes last. Always." I asked why. He looked at me over the top of his respirator mask with the expression of someone deciding how much explaining this deserves, and he said, "Because Vat 3 is the one that responds." I did not know what that meant for 3 months. After 3 months, I stopped needing him to explain it. The other informal rules of the hair boiling job are about specific behaviors in the facility at night. Behaviors that seem unrelated to the production process, but that the veteran workers follow with the completeness that indicates their origin in experience rather than policy. The first is that you do not leave the main production floor during the 3 to 4 a.m. hour. Not for a break, not for the bathroom, not for any reason if you can avoid it. If you must leave the floor during this hour, you tell your supervisor if anyone else is on shift, or you log it in the shift book, and you return as directly as possible. This rule comes, Mikhail told me when I pressed him, from the fact that the 3 to 4 a.m. hour is when the batches are in the deepest phase of the process, when the chemistry is most active, when the vats require the most consistent monitoring, and this is true as far as the technical description goes. But Mikhail also said, separately, on a different occasion, the 3 to 4 hour is when the vats are loudest, and you should be there to hear what they are doing. I asked him what they sounded like when they were loudest. He picked up his stir paddle, and he said, "You will know it when you hear it." The second informal rule is about the steam. The steam that rises from the vat surfaces and rolls through the production floor in the ventilation draft has a visual quality at night that the daytime steam does not have, that the brighter daytime lighting resolves differently, and the nighttime steam, in the reduced working light and the glow of the heating elements, can take on shapes in the rolling patterns that the draft produces. The rule is that you do not try to make sense of the shapes. You do not try to identify what the shapes resemble. You look at the vats and the instruments and the work, and the steam is peripheral, and you do not bring it to focus. This is the rule that Mikhail gave me last, the one he gave me when I had been in the job long enough that he thought I was ready for it. And he gave it to me in the flat tone of someone reporting a fact rather than a warning. He said, "The steam at night sometimes looks like something. You don't look at it long enough to find out what." I asked him if he had ever looked long enough to find out. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "Once." And then he went back to his paddle, and I went back to mine, and I did not ask what he had seen, because the way he said once told me that once was the correct number of times, and that the information he gained from it was not information he was going to share. The third informal rule is the one specific to VAT 3, the one that follows from the rule about stirring at last. When you stir VAT 3, you stir it for the prescribed duration, which is 90 seconds for each stirring interval, and you complete the 90 seconds regardless of what you feel through the paddle. Not regardless of temperature readings or chemical indicators, which you always attend to, but regardless of what you feel through the paddle in the mechanical sense, the feedback that comes through the handle from the interior of the vat during the stir. VAT 3's feedback through the paddle is different from the other 3 vats, has been different since I started working here, and presumably since before I started working here, different in a way that I am going to describe as resistance, because that is the closest single word, a quality of the material in VAT 3 during stirring that is different from what physics says boiling processed animal hair in a chemical bath should feel like. Not dramatically different. Not so different that someone who did not know to notice would necessarily notice. But different enough that I notice it every time. Have noticed it since the second week when I was paying attention closely enough to notice, and Mikhail told me to complete the 90 seconds regardless. I asked him why. He said, "Because if you stop early it will know you noticed." I have followed these rules for 2 years. For 2 years I have stirred VAT 3 last, and for 90 seconds, and I have not looked at the steam until I see shapes in it, and I have not left the floor during the 3 to 4 hour, and I have arrived for my shift and done the job and followed the rules and gone home at shift end. And then 7 months ago on a Thursday in March at 3:18 in the morning, something changed in the facility. Changed in the specific way that the veteran workers' rules are designed to prevent, and that my compliance with the rules had for 2 years prevented. And I need to tell you what happened because it is the reason the rules exist, and knowing the reason a rule exists makes the rule something different than it was before you knew. Makes it load-bearing in a way that abstract. Compliance does not make it. It is 3:18 on a Thursday in March, and I am in the stirring cycle. Vat 1 complete, Vat 2 complete, Vat 4 complete, and I have the paddle in Vat 3, and I am at 61 seconds of the 90-second stir, and the Vat 3 resistance is present in the paddle the way it always is. The specific different quality of the material in this vat that I have cataloged and accepted over 2 years of shifts. At 61 seconds, the resistance changed, not disappeared, not increased in the way that a batch chemistry problem would increase it. Changed in the specific way that the movement of something with intention changes the resistance of a medium you are moving through. Changed from the omnidirectional quality of processed material and agitation to a directional quality, a quality of something pushing back from one specific direction, from below and slightly to the left of where my paddle was moving. A push with the specific quality of a push that knows where the paddle is and is responding to where the paddle is. I completed the 90 seconds. The rule says to complete the 90 seconds, and I completed them, and I withdrew the paddle and sealed the stirring port, and I stood beside Vat 3, and I looked at the sealed surface of it, and the steam rising from the condensation at the sealed rim, and I breathed the smell of the facility, and I waited for something I did not have a name for. The vat made a sound. Not the sound of the boiling process, not the sound of chemistry and heat that the vats always make. A different sound. A sound from within the vat at a frequency that the boiling process does not produce. A low sound. Not mechanical. Not chemical. A sound that I am going to tell you is the sound of something moving in the vat below the sealed surface. Something larger than the batch material accounting for all of the batch material. Something moving below the boiling animal hair at 3:18 in the morning with the slow deliberateness of something that has been there for a long time, and that has, on this particular Thursday, decided to move. The sound lasted approximately 4 seconds, and then the vat returned to its normal processing sound, and I was standing in the main production floor of the hair boiling facility in the industrial district with the steam rolling around me in the ventilation draft and the smell of it in my lungs and the paddle in my hands, and I looked at the steam. I looked directly at the steam, and I saw the shape in it, and I will not describe the shape except to say that Mikhail said once. He said once, I understand now why the number is 1 and why the correct response to having seen it is to say nothing more about it than that single word, that single number, that small complete sentence that contains everything the experience deserves and nothing that it does not deserve, and that draws the exact boundary between what happened and what you carry forward from what happened. I looked away. I looked at the instruments. I looked at the temperature readings and the chemical indicators, and I did the tests that the schedule required, and I documented the results, and I completed the shift, and I went home, and I sat in my car in the parking lot of the facility for 30 minutes before I drove. When I came back the next night, Mikhail was on shift, and he looked at me when I came in, and he said, You saw the steam. It was not a question. I said yes. He nodded. He said, Now you know what the rules are for. I said yes. He went back to his instruments. I went back to mine. The shift began, and at 3 a.m. the facility entered its loudest hour, and I stayed on the floor, and I stirred the vats in the correct order, and vat 3 went last, and I did 90 seconds regardless of what I felt through the paddle, and I did not look at the steam, and I went home at shift end. This is what I do every night. This is what the rules produce. The rules produce a person who comes back, who stays on the floor, who completes the 90 seconds, who does not look at the steam, who is present in the facility at 3 in the morning doing the job that the job requires. And the alternative to the rules is the shape in the steam and the sound in vat 3 and the knowledge that whatever is in the material in vat 3 that makes the resistance different from the other vats has decided once to make itself known to you and might decide again. And the only thing between that decision and you is the rule, the rules, all of them, stirring order and floor presence and 90 seconds regardless. All of them, every night. Regardless. Story number 3. I want you to be in the dark with me before I tell you about the eyes. I want you to be standing in the Big Cat building at 2 in the morning with the flashlight in your hand and the food bucket in the other hand, and the smell of it. The Big Cat smell that is specific and total, and that you never fully stop registering no matter how many years you work with them. The warm ammonia and musk and meat smell of apex predators in an enclosed space. Before I show you the green. Because the green is the thing this whole story is about. The green eyes in the darkness reflecting your flashlight back at you. And to understand what the green means, you need to be in the building, need to feel the darkness of it, need to know the rules about the darkness and the green, and what you do when the green is where it should not be. I have been a night shift keeper for dangerous mammals at this zoo for 5 years, and in 5 years I have stood in that building in that dark and seen those eyes more times than I can accurately count, and I have followed the rules every time, and the rules have kept me whole and intact and able to stand in front of you and tell this story. Except for one night. One night in August when the green was where it should not be, and I followed the rule about the green being where it should not be, and what following the rule required of me on that night is the thing I need to build the whole structure of this story to reach, the thing at the center of it. The thing that I am still carrying 18 months later in the specific way of an experience that is not finished resolving. Let me tell you about the Big Cat building. Let me tell you about what it is and what it is not. Because the popular imagination of a zoo Big Cat facility and the reality of what a zoo Big Cat facility is at 2 in the morning are different enough that the difference is the whole context of this story. The building that houses our lion Pride and our 2 tigers and our 3 leopards is a purpose-built facility constructed in the renovation of the zoo 20 years ago. A building that from the public-facing side, in daylight, with the visitors present and the animals in their outside exhibits, looks like the specific combination of natural and institutional that modern zoo architecture aspires to, naturalistic landscaping and good sight lines and signage about conservation. At 2 in the morning, from the keeper's side, which is the interior access corridor that runs behind the enclosures and from which the keeper operations are conducted, the feeding, the health monitoring, the shift door operations that move the animals between inside and outside areas. The Big Cat building is something else. It is a long, low, concrete corridor with the keeper side of the enclosures on one side, heavy-gauge steel mesh and steel-framed shift doors, and the specific industrial infrastructure of a high-security animal containment facility, and bare concrete wall on the other. The corridor is 22 yards long and connects the 7 inside enclosures for lions and 1 tiger in 2 separate enclosures and 3 leopards in their individual spaces at intervals along its length. At night, the corridor is lit by the nighttime working light, a single row of fixtures at reduced output that provides working visibility without the full intensity of the daytime system. And the enclosures beyond the steel mesh are unlit, their interiors in the specific darkness of spaces that have no nighttime illumination and that are deep enough that the corridor light does not penetrate them more than a few feet beyond the mesh. This is the working environment. This is where I stand with my flashlight and my food bucket at 2 in the morning 5 nights a week. This is where the eyes are. The eyes of large felids in darkness illuminated by a single light source have a quality that is difficult to describe to someone who has not seen it, who knows it only from photographs or the stylized representation in film. The tapetum lucidum, the reflective layer behind the retina that gives these animals their extraordinary night vision, reflects a light source back at the observer with a green-gold luminescence that is brighter than the surrounding darkness by a large enough margin to create the specific experience of the eyes appearing to glow, appearing to produce their own light, appearing to be present in the darkness as primary elements rather than as reflected elements. When your flashlight beam picks up a lion's eyes across the interior of an unlit enclosure at 2 in the morning, what you see is 2 points of green-gold light floating in absolute blackness, and what you feel in response to seeing them is something that bypasses every layer of professional experience and training and reaches directly into the oldest part of the brain, the part that has been receiving the message those eyes send for hundreds of thousands of years of primate evolution. The message that says, "Predator, close, aware of you." I know this feeling. I have been receiving this message 5 nights a week for 5 years. I have made a professional peace with it, but I have not made a peace that removes the message. No amount of professional experience removes the message. The message is older than professional experience, and it arrives every time. The informal rules of the night shift big cat keeper position are extensive and specific and layered in the way of rules that have been accumulated through experience in an environment with a very clear consequence for errors. I'm going to give you the ones that matter for this story. The first rule is about the flashlight. You carry it and you use it, but you do not hold the beam on any animal's eyes for more than 3 seconds at a time. Brief illumination to confirm position, confirm the animal is where it should be, confirm the health status is nominal, and then the beam moves. This is partly about the animal's comfort. The tapetum lucidum makes bright light in the eyes genuinely uncomfortable for them. But it is also about something else that the experienced keepers describe and the formal training does not, which is that holding the beam on an animal's eyes for too long changes the quality of the interaction, changes it from the keeper observing the animal to something more mutual than observation. And more mutual is not the direction you want the relationship to go. In a darkened corridor at 2 in the morning. 3 seconds. Confirm and move. The second rule is about counting. Unlike the snake lab, the count is mandatory here, is formally required at every shift and especially at the nighttime feeding rounds. And the rule is not whether to count, but how to interpret the count. Every animal has a designated enclosure for the overnight period. The shift doors that separate the inside enclosures from the outside exhibits and from the transfer corridors are locked at the end of the evening shift, and the locked status is verified and logged. Every animal should be in its designated overnight enclosure. The count at the nighttime feeding round should confirm every animal in its designated location. This is the formal requirement. The informal rule, given to me by my supervisor, a man named Jerome who had been a keeper for dangerous mammals for 18 years, is about what you do when the count is correct but the eyes are wrong. When the number is right but the position is wrong. When you have 7 animals confirmed in 7 locations, but one of the confirmed positions has eyes that are at the wrong height for the animal that should be in that enclosure, or eyes at the wrong position in the enclosure, or eyes that are reflecting from an angle that the animal's physical dimensions and the enclosure's geometry do not account for. When the count is right, but the green is wrong. I asked Jerome what you do in that situation. He said, "You complete the feeding round in the correct order without changing your pace and without pointing your flashlight at the location where the wrong green is, and you go to the keeper station at the end of the corridor and you call me. Any hour. Call me." I asked him what he does when I call him. He said, "I call the people who know what to do about it." I asked him who those people are. He looked at me for a moment, and then he said, "I have never needed to call them more than twice. The second time they sent 2 people. They were here for 4 hours, and in the morning everything was in order." I asked him if the everything being in order was because of what those people did in the 4 hours. He said he did not know because he was not present for those 4 hours. He was in the keeper station, and when the 2 people left they told him the situation was resolved and he could resume normal operations, and he resumed normal operations. He told me this with the specific quality of someone who has made a conscious decision not to pursue certain lines of inquiry and has made this decision in the interest of being able to return to work the next night and the night after that. He said, "Call me when the green is wrong. Just do that." The third rule is about sounds at the feeding round. The big cats make sounds at night. The specific range of vocalizations that lions and tigers and leopards produce in captivity during the nighttime hours, the coughs and chuffs, and the low sawing sound that leopards make. And that is the most unsettling sound I know of that is produced by a definitively real animal. And these sounds are the normal ambient of the building at night. The baseline that I navigate the way I navigate all baselines in environments like this, by accepting it and locating the deviations. The rule is about a specific deviation, a sound that the experienced keepers identify as the sound that is not any of the animals, that has the quality of the building's ambient without being within the range of any of the animal's vocal production, that arrives in the specific interval between your light passing an enclosure and your feeding at that enclosure, in the interval between your awareness of the eyes and your approach to the shift door. Jerome described it as a sound like the dark has a voice. I asked him to be more specific. He said, "It sounds like a breath that the building takes when it is aware of you. You will know it when you hear it. When you hear the green is at the feeding port, not at the far left of the enclosure near the dense structure. At the feeding port, which is on the right side of the enclosure, and which means in the 3 seconds between my flashlight pass and my approach, the tiger has crossed the full width of the enclosure, 30 feet of enclosure, in the time between one look and the next, without sound, and is now at the feeding port at the place where my hands will be. I step back. I step back from the feeding port, and I put the food bucket down, and I take out my radio, and I call Jerome. He picks up on the second ring. I tell him what I saw. The far left, and then the feeding port in the interval between the flashlight pass and the approach. No sound. 30 feet in 3 seconds. Jerome is quiet for a moment, and then he says, "How many eyes?" I hear the question, and I hear what is inside the question. Hear what the question is really asking. And the cold that the question puts in my chest is the cold of the thing I have been not thinking since I stepped back from the feeding port. I tell him I saw two. He says, "Are you certain you saw two?" I think about the green at the feeding port, the brief image of it in the moment before I step back, and I try to be certain, and I find that I am not as certain as I need to be, and I tell Jerome I am not certain. He says, "Do not go back to the feeding port. Complete the leopard enclosures from the near side. Do not approach any of the mesh closer than 3 feet, and go to the keeper station and stay there until I call you back." I say, "What is it?" He says, "Stay in the keeper station." And he hangs up. I complete the leopard feeding from the near side, 3 feet from the mesh as Jerome said, and I go to the keeper station and I sit. I sit with the radio in my hand and the flashlight on the table and the food bucket with the remaining tiger portion still in it, and I look at the door that leads to the corridor and I listen to the building. The big cats make their nighttime sounds. The tiger makes no sound. Jerome calls me back at 3:41, an hour after my call, and tells me to resume the tiger feeding and to use the standard protocol. And when I ask him if it is resolved, he says I can resume the tiger feeding, and when I ask him again if it is resolved, he says the building is in order. I go back to the tiger enclosure. The tiger is at the far left of the enclosure near the den structure. The eyes are at the correct height. I complete the feeding through the port, and the tiger takes the food in the normal way, and the shift finishes, and I go to the keeper station and I write the log. In the log, I write what I observed at the tiger enclosure, and I note Jerome's involvement, and I write that normal operations were resumed